Alistair Vance, a man whose net worth could absorb the national debt of a small country, stood under the grand, vaulted ceiling of the Empyrean. The chandelier above him, a cascade of 1,000 hand-blown glass teardrops, cost more than the average family home. He, however, was dressed in a way that suggested he couldn't afford a single one. His clothes were simple, worn but clean, a faded chambray shirt, comfortable trousers, and scuffed leather boots that had seen more miles than most cars. He looked like a retired tradesman, perhaps, or a farmer visiting the city, his face etched with the quiet lines of a life lived outdoors, not in boardrooms. He was invisible, and that was precisely the point. He owned this building. He owned the restaurant. He owned the very air, thick with the scent of truffle oil and quiet money, that the patrons and staff breathed. They just didn't know it. He thought he was here for a simple audit, a personal, undercover inspection to see if the soul of his flagship restaurant matched its extravagant body. He'd been reading reports of declining staff morale and whispers of a toxic work environment, details that never made it into the glossy monthly summaries sent by the management. He believed a business was like a tree. Its health was determined not by the sheen of its leaves, but by the strength of its roots. He was here to check the roots. What he was about to discover, however, was not about profit margins or service efficiency. It was about his son. His only son, Leo, whom he believed to be thousands of miles away, enrolled in a prestigious hospitality management program in Switzerland. He'd paid the tuition himself, a wire transfer that could have funded a dozen such programs. But Leo was not in Switzerland. Leo was here. A sudden crash echoed from the swinging doors of the kitchen, followed by the sharp, imperious bark of a man's voice. "You useless idiot! Look what you've done! Are you blind as well as stupid?" Alistair's posture straightened slightly. That was the tone his reports had hinted at, the voice of casual cruelty. He drifted closer to the ornate host stand, feigning interest in a menu bound in dark green leather. The kitchen doors swung open again, and a man in a pristine, tailored suit, Marcus Thorne, the general manager, Alistair recognized from his file, stormed out, his face a mask of theatrical fury. He was followed by a young man, head bowed, carrying the shattered remains of several porcelain plates on a dustpan. The young man was tall and lean, with a mess of dark hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. He wore a simple, gray, ill-fitting uniform, stained with water and something unidentifiable. His hands, raw and red, trembled slightly as he held the dustpan. When he looked up for a fleeting second, his eyes sweeping the opulent lobby with a glance of pure, unadulterated weariness, Alistair's blood turned to ice. The breath caught in his throat, a sharp, painful gasp he barely managed to stifle. It was Leo. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The shimmering chandelier, the murmur of polite conversation, the clinking of silver on china, it all faded into a dull, roaring static in Alistair's ears. That was his son, his brilliant, gentle, fiercely independent son, who was supposed to be studying the economics of luxury branding in a lecture hall overlooking Lake Geneva. Instead, he was here, being dressed down like a serf by a man Alistair employed, his face pale with humiliation. Alistair felt a dizzying cocktail of emotions, shock, confusion, and a slow, cold, deeply primal anger that began to uncoil in the pit of his stomach. Marcus Thorne was still performing, his voice loud enough for the nearest tables to hear, a clear power play. "These plates cost more than you make in a week, you clumsy oaf. This is coming out of your pay. Do you understand me? Now get back in there and scrub until your fingers bleed. Maybe then you'll learn the value of other people's property." Leo said nothing. He simply nodded, his gaze fixed on the floor, the picture of subjugation. He turned and disappeared back through the swinging doors, a ghost in a gray uniform. Marcus smoothed his tie, a smug, satisfied smirk playing on his lips as he turned back to the dining room, ready to receive the silent applause of the wealthy patrons for so capably handling the help. He thought he had asserted his dominance. He thought he had reinforced the natural order of things. He didn't know that the quiet man in the faded shirt, watching him from the shadows, was not just a spectator. He was the architect of this world, and he had just witnessed its foundations crack. Within a single day, Marcus Thorne's perfectly curated empire of arrogance would be turned to dust, and the judgment would come not from on high, but from the very bottom, from the hands he so casually dismissed. We've all felt it at some point, haven't we? That sting of being underestimated, of being judged by our cover and not by the content of our character. It's a universal feeling, a quiet hurt that can either break you or forge you into something stronger. We'd love to know where you're watching from today, to feel that connection with you all. Drop a comment below and let us know. Now, let's get back to the story, because the quiet man's storm is gathering, and the forecast is for justice. Alistair took a slow, deliberate breath, forcing the roaring in his ears to subside. His instinct, the raw, paternal urge to storm into that kitchen, to grab Marcus Thorne by his silk tie and tear him down in front of everyone, was immense. But Alistair Vance hadn't built his empire on instinct. He'd built it on patience, strategy, and the cold, hard application of leverage. He would not act like a barroom brawler. He would act like a king. And a king's wrath is most devastating when it is delivered with precision. He walked to the host stand, his demeanor once again that of a humble, slightly overwhelmed man. "A table," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "For one, please." The hostess, a young woman with a professionally detached smile, looked him up and down. Her smile tightened. "I'm sorry, sir, we are fully booked this evening. Perhaps you'd like to make a reservation for another time?" It was a lie, and they both knew it. There were several empty tables visible from where they stood. Alistair smiled a disarming smile. "Oh, I'm sure you can find a small corner for an old man. I won't be any trouble." He let his gaze drift pointedly to an empty two-top near the service corridor, a table most patrons would reject. "That one looks perfect." Before she could refuse again, he slipped a folded $50 bill onto the podium. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly. It was more than she likely expected in tips all night. Her professional detachment dissolved. "Of course, sir. Right this way." As she led him to the undesirable table, Alistair felt the cold anger in his gut solidify into something harder, something more focused. A plan. He was no longer here for a simple audit. He was here on a rescue mission. And a reckoning. The kitchen of the Empyrean was a world away from the serene luxury of the dining room. It was a pressure cooker of heat, noise, and frantic energy. For Leo Vance, it was his monastery and his prison. He had chosen this. He had orchestrated the entire deception with a meticulousness that would have made his father proud, had he known the truth. When Alistair had offered to fund his master's degree in Switzerland, Leo had seen not an opportunity, but another gilded cage. All his life he had been Alistair Vance's son. His achievements were seen as inevitable, his path smoothed by a fortune he hadn't earned. He was suffocating under the weight of his own name. So he had crafted a lie. He accepted the tuition money, but instead of wiring it to the university, he placed it in a trust account, untouched. He created fake enrollment documents, sent his father weekly updates on his coursework, complete with photos of the Swiss Alps downloaded from the internet. It was a profound betrayal, he knew, but he felt it was a necessary one. He told his father he was taking a hands-on internship as part of the program, a plausible excuse for his lack of video calls. The internship was real, but it wasn't in a five-star hotel in Geneva. It was here, at the very bottom of his own family's empire. He had used a fake name, Leo Grant, and a fabricated resume to get the most menial job he could find. Dishwasher. He wanted to see the business not from the penthouse, but from the basement. He wanted to earn his own way, to understand the grit beneath the glamour, to know when the time came to one day lead, that he had earned it. The reality of his choice was harsher than he'd imagined. The work was grueling, a relentless assault of steam, grease, and burning hot water. His hands were perpetually raw, his back ached, and he was always bone-deeply tired. But the physical toll was nothing compared to the psychological one. He had expected hard work. He had not expected the casual cruelty, the systemic degradation that seemed to be the management style of Marcus Thorne. The broken plates were a perfect example. He had been rushing a stack of clean dishes to the line when Julian, a senior waiter with slick-back hair and an air of entitled laziness, had stepped directly into his path without looking. Leo had swerved to avoid him, losing his balance on a patch of slick floor. The plates had gone down with a sickening crash. Julian hadn't even broken stride, but Marcus had been on him in an instant, his voice a venomous whip. "It's coming out of your pay," Marcus had sneered, and Leo had simply nodded. The cost of the plates was nothing to him. He could buy the entire factory with a single phone call. But in this world, in the world of Leo Grant, it was a significant blow. He had to live on his meager salary. It was part of the experiment. He had less than $300 in his checking account, a self-imposed poverty that was both terrifying and strangely liberating. He returned to his station in the dish pit, the roar of the industrial washer a welcome shield from the rest of the kitchen. Steam billowed around him, clinging to his skin. He plunged his hands back into the greasy water, the sting of it on his raw knuckles a familiar pain. Through the small, circular window in the swinging door, he could see the dining room, a silent movie of elegance and ease. He saw men and women in tailored clothes laughing, oblivious to the frantic, sweaty ballet that produced their pleasure. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even resentful. He was learning. Every insult from Marcus, every dismissive glance from the servers, every aching muscle was a lesson. It was data. He was learning that the roots of his father's beautiful tree were being poisoned by the very people entrusted to care for them. He just didn't know that the arborist himself had just arrived. Clara, a young waitress with kind eyes and a perpetually worried expression, appeared at his elbow. She placed a glass of water on the stainless steel counter. "He's a nightmare," she whispered, glancing nervously toward the kitchen entrance. "Don't let him get to you." Leo offered her a small, tired smile. "I'm okay. Thanks, Clara." "He had no right to talk to you like that. Julian walked right in front of you. I saw it." "It's okay," Leo repeated, though her words were a small balm on his wounded pride. "It's just a few plates." Clara hesitated. "It's never just a few plates with him. Be careful, Leo." She scurried away before Marcus could see her talking to the lowly dishwasher. Leo watched her go, a flicker of appreciation in his chest. She was a silent enabler, too afraid to speak up, but her small acts of kindness were life rafts in a sea of contempt. He took a sip of the water, the cool liquid a brief respite. Then he turned back to the mountain of dirty dishes, unaware that on the other side of the wall, his father was watching, and the gears of a great and terrible reckoning had begun to turn. From his poorly lit table, Alistair, now known as Mr. Grice, had a perfect, if partial, view through the swinging kitchen doors every time a server bustled in or out. He saw flashes of his son, a glimpse of his back bent over a sink, the rhythmic motion of his arms scrubbing, the brief, weary look on his face as he pushed a stray lock of hair from his eyes. Each glance was a small knife in Alistair's heart. He had raised his son to be a leader, to hold his head high. To see him so diminished, so physically and emotionally burdened, was an agony. But he channeled the pain, converting it into fuel for the cold fire of his resolve. He ordered the simplest thing on the menu, the soup of the day and a basket of bread. When the waiter, a preening young man who introduced himself as Julian, delivered it, he did so with an air of barely concealed disdain. He placed the bowl down a little too hard, sloshing a bit of the bisque onto the tablecloth. "Enjoy," Julian said, the word clipped, his eyes already scanning the room for a more important table to attend to. He didn't even notice the spill. Alistair looked at the small, creamy puddle on the white linen. He didn't make a fuss. He simply took out a small, black, leather-bound notebook and a silver pen from his jacket pocket. The notebook was worn at the edges, its pages filled with his sharp, angular script. It was his external brain, a repository for observations, ideas, and the occasional multi-billion-dollar deal sketched out on a napkin and later transcribed. Tonight, it would serve a different purpose. It would be a book of judgment. He wrote, Item 1, Manager Marcus Thorne publicly berates junior staff member, Leo. Docs pay for accident without investigation. Language, useless idiot, clumsy oaf, creates hostile environment. He wrote, Item 2, Waiter, Julian, sloppy service for guests perceived as low value. Spills soup, does not acknowledge or apologize. Arrogant demeanor. He ate his soup slowly, methodically. He was a predator learning the patterns of his prey. He watched Marcus glide through the dining room, his smile a tool he used to extract praise and tips. He saw how he fawned over a table of local celebrities, personally decanting their wine, while ignoring a quiet, elderly couple in the corner who had been trying to get their check for 10 minutes. He was a peacock, all feathers and no substance, concerned only with those who could reflect his own perceived glory back at him. An hour bled into 2. Alistair ordered a coffee he didn't want, just to prolong his stay. The kitchen doors swung open, and Leo emerged, this time carrying a heavy gray tub filled with dirty linens. He moved with a heavy-footed exhaustion that pained Alistair to see. As Leo passed Julian's service station, the waiter, busy polishing a wine glass, stuck his foot out. It was a subtle, almost lazy movement, a schoolyard bully's trip. But in the crowded, fast-paced corridor, it was devastatingly effective. Leo's boot caught on Julian's outstretched loafer. He stumbled, fighting for balance, but the momentum of the heavy tub was too much. He crashed forward, the tub overturning, spilling a cascade of soiled napkins, tablecloths, and food debris across the pristine floor right at the edge of the main dining area. A collective gasp went through the nearby tables. Julian feigned shock, stepping back. "Watch where you're going, man," he exclaimed, his voice dripping with false indignation. Marcus was there in a heartbeat, his face thunderous. He didn't even ask what happened. He saw the mess, and he saw the dishwasher standing in the middle of it. The equation was simple in his mind. "My God, are you determined to ruin my restaurant tonight?" he hissed, his voice low and venomous. A stark contrast to his earlier public outburst. This was somehow more menacing. "This is a disaster. You are an uncoordinated, incompetent child." Leo, on his hands and knees, began gathering the soiled linens, his face hidden, but Alistair could see the flush of red creeping up his neck. "I'm sorry," Leo mumbled, his voice thick with a humiliation that was absolute. He tripped me." "He tripped you?" Marcus scoffed, letting out a short, derisive laugh. "Are you going to tattle now? Look at you. You can't even walk a straight line without causing a catastrophe. Clean this up. Now. And you and I will be having a conversation in my office later." Alistair's hand tightened around his pen. His knuckles were white. He watched as Leo, refusing to look up, scrambled to clean the mess, his movements clumsy with shame. He saw Clara rush over with a dustpan and brush, her face a portrait of pity and fear, helping him in silence. He saw Julian watching from the side, a smug, triumphant curl on his lip. Into the black notebook went another entry. Item 3, Julian, deliberately trips Leo, causing significant disruption. Denies action and joins manager in blaming the victim. Malicious intent. Item 4, Marcus Thorne, immediate blame without investigation. Refuses to listen to staff members' account. Threatens further disciplinary action. Fosters a culture of bullying and fear. Alistair closed the notebook with a soft snap. The sound was lost in the dining room's ambient noise, but for him, it was a gavel strike. The evidence was gathered. The prosecution had its case. Now it was time for the next phase of the plan. He had seen enough victimization. It was time to set the stage for the verdict. He watched his son retreat back into the hell of the kitchen, and the cold fire in his chest burned brighter, hotter, and with a terrible, clarifying light. The peacock and his lackey had no idea the lion was watching from the weeds. The evening wore on, a slow-motion study in institutional cruelty. Leo finished his shift in a state of numb exhaustion. The public humiliation with the linen tub having scraped raw his last reserves of emotional fortitude. Marcus had indeed pulled him into his office, a small, glass-walled box that looked out over the kitchen. He had delivered a 10-minute tirade on incompetence, a lecture dripping with condescension, concluding with a final warning. "One more mistake, Grant. One more and you're out on the street. I have 100 people who would kill for your pathetic job." Leo had just stood there absorbing it, his silence a blank wall against which Marcus's ego could rage. The real crisis, however, began just as the last of the dinner patrons were settling their bills. A woman at the celebrity table, a minor actress with a major sense of entitlement, let out a theatrical shriek. "My earring! My diamond earring! It's gone!" Chaos erupted. Staff swarmed the table. The actress's companions began a frantic, useless search under cushions and on the floor. "The earring," she wailed, "was a gift. It was worth $20,000. Panic, sharp and metallic, scented the air. Marcus Thorne rushed to the scene, his face pale. A $20,000 loss, a potential police report, a scandal involving a celebrity. This was a manager's worst nightmare. His eyes, darting around in search of a scapegoat, landed on the kitchen doors. His mind, conditioned by his own prejudices, made an immediate and damning leap. Who was the most likely thief? The waiters were professionals. The chefs were artists. The busboys had been with him for years. But the new dishwasher, the sullen, clumsy one with the cheap clothes and the resentful attitude, the one who was always broke. "The dishwasher," Marcus said, his voice a low, confident murmur to the actress's furious husband. "The new one. He was clearing this section not half an hour ago." It was all the suggestion they needed. Suspicion, once planted, grew like a weed. 20 minutes later, Marcus, flanked by two burly chefs he deputized as muscle, strode into the staff locker room where Leo was changing out of his uniform. "Grant, empty your pockets," Marcus commanded. Leo, startled, looked up from tying his shoes. "What? Why?" "Don't ask questions. A very expensive item has gone missing from the dining room. A diamond earring." Marcus's eyes were cold, accusatory. "You were the last one to clear that table." Leo felt a surge of disbelief, followed by a hot flash of anger. "You think I stole it? That's insane." "Is it?" Marcus shot back. "You're new. You're broke. It's not a difficult conclusion to reach. Now empty your pockets and open your locker, or we can wait for the police to come and do it for us. Your choice." The threat hung in the air, thick and ugly. The other staff members who were present fell silent, watching, their faces a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. Leo felt a dozen pairs of eyes on him. He was being tried and convicted in the court of staff opinion. He could refuse. He could call his father, end this farce in seconds. The thought was a tempting flare of heat. But then what? He would be Leo Vance again, the boy saved by his daddy. His entire experiment, his quest for self-reliance, would be for nothing. He had to see this through. With a slow, deliberate movement that conveyed defiance far more than any angry words could, he began to empty his pockets. A worn leather wallet containing $27 and a transit pass. A set of keys. A tube of lip balm. Nothing else. "The locker," Marcus snapped, pointing. Leo stood, walked to his locker, and turned the combination lock. He pulled the door open. The contents were sparse: a pair of worn jeans and a faded t-shirt, a small, dog-eared paperback, a textbook on sustainable agriculture and soil management, and his simple, brown-bagged lunch for the next day. Marcus rummaged through the locker with a theatrical flourish, pulling out the book and sneering at it. Sustainable agriculture? Planning on being a farmer when you get fired from here, Grant. He tossed the book onto the bench with a contemptuous flick of his wrist. He patted down the clothes, searched the corners. Nothing. The air in the room grew awkward. The certainty on Marcus's face began to curdle into frustration. At that exact moment, Clara appeared at the doorway, her face flushed. "Marcus," she said out of breath, "they found it. The earring. It was in her clutch the whole time. It had fallen into the lining." Silence. A thick, heavy, suffocating silence. Marcus froze, his hands still inside Leo's locker. He slowly turned, his expression a comical mixture of relief and embarrassment. He looked at Leo, who was standing there, his face a granite mask of cold fury. The manager's eyes held no apology. There was only annoyance, as if Leo were somehow responsible for his own wrongful accusation. "Well," Marcus said, clearing his throat and straightening his suit jacket, "a simple misunderstanding, as you were." He turned and swept out of the room, the two chefs following in his wake like confused bodyguards. He offered no apology, no acknowledgement of the false accusation, no recognition of the public humiliation he had just inflicted. Leo stood perfectly still, his fists clenched at his sides. He looked at the faces of his co-workers. Some looked away, ashamed. Others just stared, their expressions blank. He had been stripped bare, accused, and then dismissed as if nothing had happened. He slowly knelt and picked up his textbook, wiping a smudge of dirt from the cover. The quiet dignity of the gesture was more powerful than any shout. From his table in the now emptying dining room, Alistair had not seen the drama in the locker room, but he had witnessed the resolution. He saw Clara run from the celebrity table to the kitchen, and he saw the relieved, anticlimactic end to the search. A few minutes later, he watched Marcus stride back into the dining room, his composure restored, all smiles and apologies to the actress. Alistair's jaw was tight. He could guess what had transpired in the interim. He made one final note in his book. Item 5. Marcus Thorne. Upon report of missing item, immediately targets Leo based on prejudice, conducts public search and accusation. No apology offered when accusation is proven false. Gross misconduct, abuse of power. He closed the book. The prosecution rested. It was time to prepare the courtroom. He paid his bill, in cash, leaving Julian a paltry $1 tip that was more of an insult than no tip at all, and walked out into the cool night air. As he stood on the sidewalk, the lights of the Empyrean glowing behind him, he pulled out his phone. He didn't call the police. He didn't call a lawyer. He called his executive assistant, a woman of formidable efficiency named Evelyn. "Evelyn," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the unmistakable weight of command. "I need you to do something for me. Book the main dining room at the Empyrean for a private event tomorrow evening. A mandatory corporate dinner for the entire executive board of Vance Holdings." "Of course, Mr. Vance," Evelyn replied, her voice unruffled by the late-night, last-minute command. "Shall I put it under your name?" "No," Alistair said, a grim smile touching his lips for the first time that night. "Put it under the company name. Let Marcus Thorne think he's about to impress the board. I want him at his most arrogant. I, however, will be arriving separately, and I won't be on the guest list." The news of the Vance Holdings booking hit the Empyrean like a bolt of lightning. Marcus Thorne received the email from Alistair Vance's executive assistant the next morning and felt a jolt of pure, unadulterated triumph. Vance Holdings, the parent company, the corporate gods themselves were descending from their Olympus on the top floors of the Vance Tower to dine at his restaurant. This wasn't just a big booking, it was an audition. A stellar performance tonight could mean a promotion, a regional directorship, a quantum leap in his career. Failure was not an option. He became a whirlwind of manic energy, a petty dictator preparing for a royal visit. He called an all-staff meeting first thing. "Listen up," he announced, pacing before the assembled crew like a general before battle. "Tonight, we are hosting the executive board of Vance Holdings, not our usual clientele of new money socialites and fading celebrities. These are the people who sign our paychecks. They are the most important patrons to ever walk through that door. I want perfection. Not excellence, perfection." His eyes scanned the room, landing on Leo, who stood at the back, trying to be invisible. "That means no mistakes, no broken plates." His gaze was pointed. "No clumsiness, no drama. Every glass must sparkle. Every piece of silver must be polished until you can see your terrified face in it. The kitchen will run with military precision. The service will be silent, intuitive, and flawless. Anyone, and I mean anyone, who steps a single toe out of line will be fired before they can even blink. Are we clear?" A chorus of nervous, "Yes, Marcus, ease," filled the room. The pressure was immense, radiating off Marcus in palpable waves. For the rest of the day, he was a terror, stalking the halls, inspecting every corner, critiquing every minute detail. He berated a busboy for a barely visible fingerprint on a water glass. He screamed at the head chef because the microgreens for the amuse-bouche were, in his opinion, a millimeter too long. The entire restaurant was a tinderbox of anxiety, and Marcus was the one holding the match. Leo was assigned the most grueling tasks. He spent hours in the sweltering dish pit, ensuring every single plate, glass, and piece of cutlery for the event was not just clean, but sterile, holding each one up to the light to check for water spots. Then he was tasked with polishing the brass railings on the main staircase, a job that was usually reserved for the daytime cleaning crew. He worked on his hands and knees, the acrid smell of the polish filling his nostrils, his muscles screaming in protest. All the while, Marcus would walk by, offering helpful comments like, "Put your back into it, Grant. Do you want the board to see tarnish?" Leo worked in a silent fury. The injustice of the previous night still burned in him. He had been tempted, so tempted, to walk out, to just disappear and let this ugly chapter end. But something held him back. It was a stubborn, prideful refusal to be broken by a man like Marcus. He had started this to prove something to himself, and he wouldn't let Thorne be the reason he failed. He would endure this one last night. He would do his job perfectly, and then, tomorrow, he would quit on his own terms. As evening fell, Alistair sat in a quiet cafe across the street, nursing a cup of tea. He watched the lights of the Empyrean blaze to life. He saw the valets in their crisp red jackets assembling at the curb. He was dressed in the same humble attire as the previous night, his Mr. Gryce costume. He felt a profound sense of calm, the quiet serenity that comes before a hurricane makes landfall. His board members, all informed of the situation's broad strokes, had been instructed to arrive in 20-minute intervals to build the sense of occasion. They knew their role was not just to dine, but to bear witness. At precisely 7 p.m., the first black town car pulled up. Marcus, his hair perfect, his suit immaculate, practically bounded out the front door to greet the first arrival, the chief financial officer of Vance Holdings. Alistair watched the pantomime of obsequious bowing and scraping, a faint, grim smile on his face. Marcus was performing exactly as predicted. He was puffing up his chest, preening and posturing, completely unaware that the stage he stood on was a trap door, and the man with his hand on the lever was watching from across the street. One by one, the board members arrived. The COO, the head of legal, the VP of marketing, a parade of the most powerful corporate figures in the city. Marcus was in heaven, his voice smooth as honey, his charm turned up to its highest setting. He led them to the central table, a grand affair set for 12, personally ensuring their every comfort. Finally, at 7:45 p.m., when the entire board was seated, Alistair finished his tea. He left a $10 bill on the table, walked out of the cafe, and crossed the street. He approached the grand entrance of the Empyrean, not as an owner, but as a ghost from the night before. The doorman, recognizing him from his previous visit, gave him a suspicious look but didn't stop him. Alistair walked into the lobby. The hostess from the night before saw him, and her face fell. She immediately intercepted him. "Sir, I'm sorry, but the restaurant is closed for a private event tonight. You'll have to leave." "I'm just here to see the manager," Alistair said calmly. Her eyes flickered with panic. "Mr. Thorne is extremely busy. He can't be disturbed." At that moment, Marcus himself, having seen the minor commotion from the dining room entrance, strode into the lobby, his face a mask of irritation. Who was this old man disturbing his perfect evening? Then he saw Alistair's face. Recognition dawned, but not of his true identity. He saw the shabby old man from last night, the one who had left a $1 tip, the one who looked like he belonged in a soup kitchen, not a temple of haute cuisine. "You!" Marcus spat, his voice a low growl. The fawning charm he'd shown the board members vanished, replaced by pure, unadulterated contempt. "I don't know how you got in here, but you are leaving right now. This is a private event." He gestured dismissively to the doorman. "Henry, show this gentleman out, and make sure he doesn't come back." The doorman, Henry, a large man, stepped forward and placed a heavy hand on Alistair's shoulder. "Come on, old-timer, let's go." Alistair didn't flinch. He didn't resist. He simply looked past Marcus, his gaze directed toward the dining room. "I don't think that will be necessary." "Oh, you don't?" Marcus sneered, enjoying himself now. "And who are you to think anything? Get him out of my restaurant." As Henry began to apply pressure to escort him out, a voice, calm and authoritative, cut through the tension. "Marcus." It was Robert Chen, the chief operating officer of Vance Holdings, who had risen from his seat at the board members' table and walked to the edge of the dining room. He stood there, his expression unreadable. Marcus immediately snapped back into his sycophantic persona, a Jekyll and Hyde transformation that was dizzying to behold. "Mr. Chen, my apologies. Just dealing with a bit of local color that wandered in off the street. It's handled." Robert Chen didn't smile. He looked from Marcus to the doorman's hand on Alistair's shoulder, and then to Alistair himself. A flicker of something, deference, respect, passed through his eyes. "I think," Robert said slowly, his voice carrying across the now silent lobby, "you should take your hand off him." He then looked directly at Marcus, his gaze turning to ice. "Marcus, you are the general manager here, are you not?" "Yes, of course, Mr. Chen," Marcus said, puffing up his chest. "Then perhaps," Robert continued, his voice dangerously soft, "you should be introduced to the man who owns the building, the restaurant, and the company you work for. Marcus Thorne, meet Alistair Vance, our chairman." The words dropped into the opulent lobby like stones into a silent pool. The doorman, Henry, snatched his hand back from Alistair's shoulder as if he'd been burned. The hostess's face went completely white, her mouth hanging slightly open. The world stopped. For Marcus Thorne, the floor didn't just fall away, the entire universe collapsed. He stared at the quiet old man in the faded chambray shirt, the man he had dismissed, insulted, and tried to have thrown out onto the street. He tried to process the information, but his brain refused to comply. The name, Alistair Vance, was a mythical one, a titan of industry. It could not possibly belong to this person. But then he looked at the stony face of Robert Chen and the respectful, watchful eyes of the entire Vance Holdings board, who were now standing by their table, observing the scene. The truth hit him with the force of a physical blow. It was real. This was happening. Alistair Vance, the billionaire, said nothing. He simply held Marcus's gaze, his expression not of anger, but of a profound and terrible disappointment. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Marcus's carefully constructed world of arrogance and power crumbled to dust in that silence. His face, which had been a mask of contempt just moments before, contorted into a rictus of pure, unadulterated horror. The blood drained from his face, leaving him looking sallow and sick under the warm, expensive lighting. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a dry, croaking sound came out. The peacock's feathers had been violently plucked, revealing the scrawny, terrified creature underneath. "Mr. Vance?" Marcus finally stammered, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. I, I don't, I had no idea." Alistair finally moved. He shrugged off the lingering psychic weight of the doorman's hand and took a slow, deliberate step forward. He was no longer Mr. Gryce, the unassuming old man. In the space of a single heartbeat, he had transformed. His posture seemed straighter, his presence filling the room. The quietness about him was no longer the quiet of meekness, but the quiet of immense, coiled power. "You had no idea," Alistair repeated, his voice soft, yet it carried to every corner of the silent restaurant. "That is the heart of the problem, isn't it, Marcus? You had no idea who I was, and so you treated me according to what you saw. A man of no importance, a nuisance to be discarded." He walked past the frozen form of the manager and into the main dining room, his worn boots making no sound on the plush carpet. The board members parted for him as he approached the head of the grand table. He didn't sit. He turned, his back to the empty chair, and faced the room, his gaze sweeping over the terrified staff who lingered at the edges, the stunned board members, and finally settling back on Marcus, who had followed him in like a man being led to his own execution. "Tell me, Marcus," Alistair began, his tone conversational, the kind a professor might use with a struggling student. "What is the philosophy of the Empyrean? What is the mission statement we sell to our guests?" Marcus swallowed hard, his mind racing to recall the corporate drivel he had helped write. "Excellence," he croaked, "unparalleled service, an unforgettable experience of luxury and respect." "Respect," Alistair echoed, seizing the word. "An interesting choice. Let's talk about respect. Is it respectful, Marcus, to scream at an employee in front of patrons, calling him a useless idiot?" The color that had drained from Marcus's face now returned in a blotchy, panicked flush. He remembered the incident with the broken plates. He hadn't realized anyone was paying attention. That was a disciplinary matter, a moment of frustration. The staff needs a firm hand. "A firm hand or a cruel one?" Alistair countered, his voice still unnervingly calm. He pulled the small black notebook from his pocket and opened it. The sight of the book seemed to trigger a new wave of terror in Marcus. "Let's review. Item 1. You publicly berated a young man for an accident. Item 2. Your senior waiter, Julian, provided subpar service. And then, Item 3. Deliberately tripped that same young man, causing him to spill a tub of linens. You then, Item 4, refused to hear his side of the story and instead blamed him for being an uncoordinated, incompetent child. Is this your definition of a firm hand?" Each point landed like a hammer blow. Marcus staggered back a step, his eyes wide. Julian, who had been observing from a service station, went rigid, realizing the net was closing around him as well. "And then," Alistair continued, his eyes lifting from the notebook to pin Marcus with a cold stare, "there was the matter of the missing earring. Item 5. You immediately decided with no evidence whatsoever that this same young man was a thief. You subjected him to a humiliating public search of his belongings in front of his colleagues. And when the earring was found and his innocence was proven, you offered him no apology. You simply walked away. Tell me, Marcus, where in that sequence of events does the respect you mentioned fit in?" Marcus was speechless. He was drowning. The events of the past 2 days were being replayed for him, but now they were cast in the horrifying light of his owner's scrutiny. Every action, every word he had uttered with such casual arrogance was now an indictment. "Who I am is irrelevant," Alistair said, his voice dropping lower, becoming more intense. "I could have been any customer, a tourist, a local celebrating an anniversary, or I could have been what you thought I was, a poor man who just wanted a hot meal. Would any of that have justified the way you treated me? The way you treat your staff? You believe respect is something to be given only to those who can advance your career. You are wrong. Respect is the baseline. It is the minimum requirement of human decency, a requirement you have failed to meet on every conceivable level." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle into the crushing silence. "You have poisoned the roots of this place, Marcus. You have mistaken cruelty for strength and arrogance for authority. This isn't a restaurant. It's a monument to your own ego." Alistair turned his head slightly. "Clara," he said, his voice softening. The young waitress, who had been standing near the kitchen doors, her hand over her mouth, jumped. "You saw the incident with the linen tub. Did Julian trip Leo?" All eyes turned to her. It was her moment of choice, to remain the silent enabler or to speak the truth. She looked at Marcus's terrified face, then at Leo, who she could just see peering through the window of the kitchen door, his expression one of utter confusion. She took a deep breath. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "Yes, he did. He stuck his foot out. I saw him." Alistair nodded slowly. "Thank you, Clara." He then raised his voice slightly. "Leo, could you come out here, please?" The kitchen doors swung open, and Leo stepped out into the dining room. He was still in his gray work uniform, his hands damp, a look of profound bewilderment on his face. He saw the assembled board members, the terrified staff, the broken man that was Marcus Thorne, and finally, the quiet man from the night before, the one called Mr. Grice, standing at the head of the table, commanding the entire room. And then his eyes truly focused, and he saw past the worn clothes and the tired lines on the man's face. He saw his father. "Dad?" The word was a whisper of pure disbelief. Alistair walked over to his son, ignoring the collective gasp that rippled through the room. He placed a hand on Leo's shoulder, a gesture of profound pride and possession. He turned back to face the room, his son by his side. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alistair announced, his voice ringing with authority and a deep, resonant emotion. "I would like you to meet the man you have known as Leo Grant, the dishwasher. This is Leo Vance, my son." The final bomb had been dropped. The detonation was silent but absolute, sending shockwaves that shattered the last vestiges of Marcus Thorne's reality. Julian the waiter looked as if he might faint. The hostess, who had tried to refuse Alistair a table, looked at the floor, wishing it would swallow her. The entire staff stared, their minds struggling to reconcile the image of the boy they had seen scrubbing floors and being berated with the heir to the entire Vance fortune. Marcus's face was a grotesque canvas of warring emotions. The horror of realizing he had systematically abused his own boss was now compounded by the earth-shattering revelation that his primary victim was the boss's son. It was a catastrophe so complete, so perfect in its disastrous symmetry that it bordered on the surreal. He looked at Leo, at the son of the billionaire, standing there in his stained dishwasher's uniform, and for the first time, he truly saw him. He saw the quiet dignity that had so infuriated him, the unnerving calm in the face of his tirades, and he understood that it had not been weakness, it had been strength. A strength he could not possibly comprehend. "My son," Alistair continued, his hands still resting firmly on Leo's shoulder, a silent testament of solidarity, wanted to understand this business from the ground up, not from a classroom in Switzerland, but from here, from the dish pit, from the factory floor. He gave up his name, his privilege, his comfort, to learn what it truly means to work. He wanted to earn his place, and in the process, you have given him a masterclass education. not in hospitality, but in cruelty, in arrogance, in the abuse of power. He turned his gaze back to Marcus, and all the quiet disappointment was gone, replaced by a glint of cold, hard steel. You have a choice, Marcus. You can resign, effective immediately, sign a non-disclosure agreement, and you will receive 1 month's severance. Your record will simply state, resign for personal reasons. Or you can be fired, for cause. And I will personally ensure that a full and detailed report of your conduct, including witness statements from my entire executive board, is sent to the head of every major hospitality group in this country. You will never manage so much as a roadside motel again. The choice is yours. You have 30 seconds. The ultimatum was brutal and absolute. There was no negotiation, no room for appeal. Marcus stood there, swaying slightly, the two options laid before him like a guillotine and a hangman's noose. Resignation was professional death. Termination was professional annihilation. His mind, which had always been so quick with a sneer or a cutting remark, was utterly blank. He looked at the faces of the board members, cold and impassive. He looked at Alistair Vance, whose expression was like carved granite. He looked at Leo, whose face held not triumph, but a quiet, weary sadness. It was this, more than anything, that broke him. The absence of vindictiveness in the eyes of the boy he had tormented was the final, crushing judgment. I resign, Marcus whispered, the words barely audible. They were the last gasp of his career. A wise decision, Alistair said without a trace of warmth. Evelyn, he called out to his assistant, who was standing near the entrance. Please escort Mr. Thorne to an empty office and provide him with the necessary paperwork. His access to the building systems is to be revoked immediately. He then turned his attention to the waiter. Julian, he said, and the young man flinched as if struck. Your employment here is terminated, effective now, for malicious endangerment of a fellow employee and for creating a hostile work environment. Your final paycheck will be mailed to you. Please leave the premises. Julian, his face pale and clammy, didn't even try to argue. He unclipped his name tag, let it fall to the floor, and turned and walked away, a man suddenly stripped of his borrowed arrogance, looking small and pathetic. The dining room was left in a state of suspended animation. The two primary antagonists had been dispatched with surgical precision. The remaining staff stood frozen, a mixture of fear and a dawning, incredible sense of liberation washing over them. They were watching a revolution they had never dared to dream of. Alistair surveyed the room, his expression softening slightly. To the rest of you, he said, his voice regaining its warmth. This evening has been a test, not just for my son, but for the soul of this restaurant. And while much of what I have seen has disappointed me deeply, I have also seen glimmers of hope. His eyes found Clara. I have seen kindness in the face of fear. I have seen quiet diligence in the face of adversity. He turned to his son. The power dynamic in the room had been inverted, but now Alistair performed another, more profound reversal. He did not anoint his son as the new king. He humbled himself before Leo's experience. Leo, he said, his voice filled with a respect that was entirely new. You have seen more of the truth of this place in 2 months than I have in years. You have lived in the trenches. So I ask you, not as your father, but as the chairman of this company, what should we do now? What needs to change? It was the ultimate validation. It was not his name that gave him a voice, but his experience. All the humiliation, all the exhaustion, all the quiet suffering, it had been transmuted into wisdom. Leo looked at his father, then at the anxious faces of his former co-workers. He stood a little taller, the weariness in his posture replaced by a quiet confidence he had earned with raw knuckles and an aching back. The first thing, Leo said, his voice steady and clear, is that we change the culture. No one should ever have to feel the way I felt working here. No one should be afraid to come to work. He looked at the kitchen staff, the busboys, the hostesses. Profit sharing for everyone, from the head chef to the person who scrubs the pots. When the restaurant succeeds, everyone who makes that success possible should share in the rewards, not just the managers. A murmur went through the staff. It was a radical idea. Secondly, Leo continued, we establish an independent employee council, a safe channel for grievances, with real power to investigate and recommend disciplinary action, even against senior management. No one should have to rely on the owner going undercover to get justice. Robert Chen, the COO, nodded slowly, impressed. And third, Leo said, looking at Clara, we promote from within, based on character and competence, not on who is best at managing up. People who show kindness and integrity, they should be our leaders. He paused, the weight of his own words settling on him. He had spoken not as an heir, but as a worker. He had offered solutions born from genuine empathy. Alistair Vance looked at his son, and for the first time he was not just filled with love, but with a profound and overwhelming sense of pride. He had sent a boy to Switzerland to learn about business, but the boy had stayed home and become a man, learning about humanity instead. Then that is what we will do, Alistair said, his voice thick with emotion. He turned to the stunned board members. Effective immediately, I am appointing Leo Vance as the interim director of operations for this restaurant. His first task will be to implement the changes he has just outlined. Robert, I want you to give him every resource he needs. Robert Chen smiled, a genuine, warm smile. It will be my pleasure, Mr. Vance. The revolution was complete. The tyrant was deposed, the heir revealed, and a new order declared, all in the space of less than an hour. For the staff of the Empyrean, the world had been turned upside down, only to be set right again. And for Leo Vance, his long, secret journey was over. He had walked through the fire of humiliation and emerged not just unscathed, but forged into something new. He was no longer just Alistair Vance's son, he was himself. The weeks that followed were a period of profound transformation. The immediate aftermath of the revelation was chaotic. Marcus Thorne and Julian vanished from the city's hospitality scene as if they had never existed. The resignation, though technically voluntary, carried the stench of disgrace, and word of what had happened at the Vance Holdings dinner spread like wildfire through the industry's gossip channels. It became a cautionary tale, a modern-day fable about the dangers of hubris. For the remaining staff at the Empyrean, the shift was seismic. They looked at Leo with a mixture of awe, fear, and disbelief. He was still the same person who had scrubbed their dishes and cleaned their floors, yet he was now their ultimate boss, the heir to the throne. The first few days were awkward. People who had ignored him now tripped over themselves to say hello. Those who had been passively complicit in his mistreatment avoided his gaze, terrified of retribution. But Leo had no interest in retribution. His purpose was reform. On his first official day as director of operations, he didn't move into Marcus's glass-walled office. Instead, he called a meeting in the staff break room, the same room where he had been publicly humiliated. He arrived not in a suit, but in a simple, clean chef's jacket. He brought coffee and pastries for everyone. I know this is strange for everyone, he began, his tone open and honest. I want to be clear about a few things. I am not here to punish anyone for the past. I am here to build a better future with you. What I experienced here was a symptom of a sick culture. My goal is to heal it, together. He then, with the full backing of the Vance Holdings board, laid out his plan. He didn't just talk about the profit-sharing program. He presented the detailed financial model, showing exactly how it would work, ensuring every employee understood their stake. He didn't just announce the employee council. He asked for volunteers to form a committee to write its charter, giving the power of its creation to the staff itself. His most significant first move was promoting Clara. He called her into the office, which he had insisted be used as a shared workspace for any staff needing quiet to do administrative tasks, and offered her the position of assistant general manager. She was stunned. Me? But I don't have the experience. I'm just a waitress. You have the character, Leo replied firmly. I don't need a manager who knows how to flatter VIPs. I need a leader who knows how to be kind. You brought me a glass of water when I was at my lowest. You spoke the truth when you were terrified. That's more experience than Marcus Thorne had in his entire life. I can teach you the administrative side. I can't teach integrity. Clara accepted, tears of gratitude in her eyes. Her promotion sent a powerful message through the restaurant. The old currency of arrogance was worthless. The new currency was character. Leo worked tirelessly, not from the office, but from the floor. He spent time in the kitchen, not as a boss, but as a student, learning from the chefs. He worked shifts as a busboy to understand the workflow. He shadowed the hosts to see the pressures they were under. He was not managing from above, he was leading from within. He remembered the sting of every insult, the ache of every pointless task, and used those memories as his guide. Alistair watched from a distance, giving his son the space he needed to grow into his new role. He received daily updates from Robert Chen, each one filled with glowing reports of Leo's intuitive leadership and the dramatic shift in staff morale. The oppressive tension that had once permeated the Empyrean was gone, replaced by a buzzing, collaborative energy. About a month after the takeover, Alistair invited Leo to dinner, not at the restaurant, but at home, in the quiet, cavernous house Leo had grown up in. It was the first time they had truly been alone since the truth had come out. They sat in Alistair's study, surrounded by books and memories. Alistair poured them both a glass of scotch. I owe you an apology, the billionaire said, his voice quiet. Leo looked at him surprised. For what? For not seeing you, Alistair said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. I saw my son. I saw a name to carry on a legacy. I saw a path I had laid out. I didn't see the man who needed to forge his own. Your lie, your deception, it was born from a failure on my part. I built you a gilded cage and was surprised when you wanted to fly. The confession was a bridge across the emotional distance that had defined their relationship for years. I'm sorry I lied to you, Dad, Leo said, his voice thick with emotion. I had to know. I had to know if I could exist without the Vance name. I had to feel what it was like to be invisible, to be judged only by the work of my hands. And what did you learn? Alistair asked. I learned that dignity is not something that can be given or taken away by a title or a bank account, Leo said, his gaze distant as he recalled the long, humiliating days. It's something you hold inside you. I learned that true power isn't the ability to command people, but the ability to inspire them. And I learned that the most important work in any business happens at the bottom, in the places the people at the top never bother to look. Alistair nodded, a profound sense of peace settling over him. He raised his glass. To the dishwasher, he said. Leo smiled, a true, warm smile, and clinked his glass against his father's. To the chairman, he replied. A few weeks later, a large crate arrived at the restaurant. Inside was a new sign. Leo directed the work crew to take down the ostentatious gold leaf sign that read, The Empyrean. In its place, they mounted a simpler, more elegant one, crafted from reclaimed wood and brushed steel. It read, simply, Leo's. The restaurant reopened under its new name with a new philosophy. The food was still exquisite, the service still impeccable, but the atmosphere had changed. It was warm, welcoming, alive. The staff moved with a sense of purpose and pride because now it was their restaurant too. They were partners, not just employees. Leo's became the most sought-after reservation in the city, not just for its food, but for its story. It was a place built on a foundation of respect. The final moral of this story isn't just about a billionaire's son or a tyrannical manager. It's a deeper truth that resonates in every workplace, in every family, in every community. It's the truth that a person's worth is not defined by their job title, their bank balance, or the clothes they wear. True worth lies in character, in integrity, and in the quiet dignity with which we treat others, especially those who we believe have no power over us. It is a reminder that leadership is not about wielding authority, but about empowering those around you. It's about having the humility to scrub the floors to understand what it takes to keep the house clean. Leo Vance learned this lesson in the steam and grime of a dish pit. Marcus Thorne learned it in the silent, terrifying fall from his pedestal. What does this story make you think about in your own life or workplace? Have you ever seen a Marcus get their comeuppance or a Leo rise to the occasion? We would be honored to read your stories in the comments below. Your experiences give these tales meaning. And if this story resonated with you, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to our channel for more content that explores the triumphs of the human spirit. Thank you for being here with us today.